Thank you. Boa tarde. Bem-vindas a todas. I welcome you all. Sanibonani, Mulweni, Alo, Tobelang, Dumilang, Dumlela, Abushain, Sanibonani, Avuani, e Limachironi. My name is Nduduzo Siba. Umasibalikhulu uDlamini uSembatha Mkhonto ubeze mathemahle uMdlovu Makatuze Jamakasijatu yena wasesiphahleni saNombewu. I'm from South Africa. Oh my word, it's actually a bit difficult for me to present in English. I haven't done this in a long time. But I would really like to extend a warm welcome to our friends and colleagues in the countries, also extending to Canada, South Africa, people from all over the continent. And before we start with the presentation for the third edition of Fronteiras Cruzadas, I would like to present a music that I prepared for you today. This is a song that comes from my country, and it's going to be done in my language, Zulu. Umbombela, it's called the train song. Why you ever say me? Why you wonu yangishia? Why you why you ever say me? Why you wonu yangishia? Why you bella? Why you ever say me? Why you bella? Wonu yangishia? Why you bella? Why you ever say me? Why you bella? Wonu yangishia? Sugar.
She's frozen.
Why you
No.
Why you ever say me? Why you bella? Wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Sugar. Sugar. Wonu yangishia? Why you ever say you wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Wonu yangishia? Thank you so much, everyone. Sorry about the technical glitch. I think in this day, when we're trying to work online, we do get to experience the reality of not being in close proximity with one another. Introducing myself and just sharing a little bit about my background. I'll try to just calm down because emotionally, when I connect to music from back home, I normally just get a bit emotional. So I would just like to share with you the person that has just presented themselves. I was born and raised in South Africa in a province called KwaZulu-Natal, which is a place of the Zulu people. I've been living and working in Brazil, based in Sao Paulo for the past 7 years. And in today's day, I am an artist. I am a singer, dancer. I'm an activist. I'm an actress, and I do quite a lot of social activities. But most of all, I think it would be very unjust for me to not share with you the reason why I'm here today, and basically to extend my thanks and acknowledgement to the University of Sao Paulo, not just for providing this place whereby today we are able to organize a forum that is this powerful and this important, but for welcoming me into their space even after a difficult process in my life. So in 2013, I came to Brazil, a tourist, just to figure out things about my life. And the unfortunate event happened that I was arrested. During that period and being inside the system, I actually had to learn a lot about myself and a lot about the world that we are living in. It kind of took off the ignorance that I had. And right now, I'm able to perform and articulate my art and have a voice and places to actually spread my message because of the hand that reached out to me during my darkest moments through the project that was organized by the University of Sao Paulo together with Professor Carolina Juarez to do voice proper, own voice, which was a project of a music class inside Carandiru, the Penitenciaria Feminina. So with that, a person that I never thought I could be was born. In that dark place, this person that you guys are seeing today was born. And that is why it would be so hard for me to not mention how the importance of this journey, the importance of this union and opening spaces to actually be able to communicate and have discussions about the communities and societies that we are living in today's age, especially touching on the fact that I'm an immigrant. Not only am I just an immigrant, I'm a South African Black female, and I'm living in a country that has got its own diversities and its own dynamics politically, socially, culturally, and as a woman, it's very important to have places like this and to have people who actually join hands and create a platform where we can all just be a place where we can understand a bit and share a bit about each other. I'm very grateful to be part of this edition of the Fronteiras Cruzadas, Fronte International Forum. When I remember last year when we did the forum, I was not really in a place where I felt I could share my story, because I was still a bit skeptical and afraid of what will people say, what will people think, and going through the process and the motions, because I'm still responding to my expulsion. I'm still going after documentation. I'm still just trying to find who this person is. So it was very hard for me to be able to express, especially because it was inside a place where I had to try and be practical in Portuguese. And today it's actually a great opportunity for me as a person to actually expand my voice and be able to say things that are heartfelt in my language, or in a language that I'm most comfortable in. The people that organized this event have been people that really went out on a limb for me and for most women and men that are here, that are in the immigration sector and refugees. They've gone out and just kind of made sure that we have a place. We have a place to reach out to each other. We have a place where we feel welcome and invited. We have a place where we can integrate and communicate, and understanding all the dynamics that are currently around us. So with that said, I would really like to welcome Daniel, Professor Artur Matuck is here with us. Karina Quintilina is also here to join us for this web conversation. And yes, it is a great year to introduce this year's program. Welcome, and I'm welcoming you all to the 2020 edition of Frontiki Kwazi.
Thank you, Duduzo. Thank you so much. Deixa eu ver, aonde que tá aquele texto, hein? Eu perdi ele, peraí. Public chat, não. Share notes. Yes. So we have the pleasure now to open the program of the third edition of Frontiki Kwazi International Forum. Frontiki Kwazi means Haitian Creole means crossed boundaries. So from November 24 to March of the next year, the program will feature international guest conferences, debates, working groups, workshops, and human rights, among other cultural activities. We are counting with the support of CAPES, a Brazilian funding agency from the federal government, and from the School of Communications and Arts at the University of São Paulo, Brazil.
The third Frontiki Kwazi will be the meeting point for a participating public interested in thinking and acting together on new challenges regarding rights of expelled, displaced refugee populations in the diaspora, considering the accelerated process of a multidimensional crisis, political, economic, social, environmental, and sanitary. The third edition of Fronteiras Cruzadas will congregate international lecturers from a diverse cultural backgrounds to discuss the theme of transnational migration and social transformation. There will be invited from Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Mexico, Haiti, Trinidad and Tobago, United States, Canada, and Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, Guinea-Bissau, Republic of Congo, Senegal, Morocco, Spain, Russia, and Palestine and Syria.
And the event aims to cross the nationalisms and social strata to understand teachers, students, artists, public managers, workers of various categories, social movements, and human rights organizations can collaborate with migrants in the face of a dramatic context of rights, with alarming expressions of racism, xenophobia, and white supremacism. Therefore, the Forum has designed spaces to promote the exchange of knowledge, expanding local and global networks and resistances. The Forum has the general coordination of Professor Artur Matuck, in close collaboration with Vera Teres, Paulo Daniel Fará, all of them teachers from the University of São Paulo, and Professor Patrícia Vilém from the Research Center Abdão Unimontes, Minas Gerais, Brazil.
This forum was produced this year by researcher and lawyer Karina Quintanilla, which is here with us. It's the final result of the Endeavorite network of scholars working in close cooperation with students, social workers, lawyers, migrant collectives, cultural institutions, and research groups from Brazil and others from Latin America, Canada, and Europe.
The Forum has been constituted as an interdisciplinary social, artistic, multicultural academic initiative since 2017 at the University of Brazil. We are committed to the production of critical knowledge, but also endeavoring towards the humanistic formation of different individuals and groups. Our goal is to enable them to congregate, to form communities, to collaborate with each other in new situations, facing unheard of challenges.
So today we have the mediation of Groupe, please, for us to start the meeting and for you to know Yana Meerzon and Henry Daniel's work. So please, Artur Matuck.
Hereafter, we are opening the third edition of the International Forum Crossed Borders in partnership with the Interdisciplinary Research Group, Groupe de Recherche Interdisciplinaire, Studies in Migration, Études sur la migration based in Canada. This telematic event promotes a web conversation with Professor Yana Meerzon from the University of Ottawa in Canada. In last August, Professor Meerzon launched the book, Performance, Subjectivity, Cosmopolitanism, published by Palgrave Editions. Professor Yana Meerzon was born in Russia, was an immigrated to Canada. She is our special guest at this web conversation. She teaches in the theater department at the University of Ottawa and was named president of the Canadian Theatre Research Association in April 2020. Her research interests are very diverse, including theater and performance theory, theater of exile and migration, and cultural and interdisciplinary studies. The Fórum Fronteiras Cruzadas is also honored to have the participation of Professor Henry Daniel. He is currently Professor of Dance and Performance Studies at Simon Fraser University School for the Contemporary Arts. He is the author of Contemporary Nomads, Art Installation, and the book yet to be published, Going West to Find East, Going East to Find West, Recherche Cortical and Cartographic Maps, which is about to be launched. Henry Daniel brings references as displaced and dislocated people, a condition that is applied to those bodies that have had to perform their way through a range of geopolitical, socioeconomic, and psychological frameworks that colonizing process have imposed on them. So both of you, welcome to this forum. And now I pass my word to Professor Yana Meerzon. Okay. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you to Artur, to Daniel, to Karina, to everybody who is involved in making this meeting possible. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a privilege to be in your company. It's a privilege to talk about my work with you. So I'm extremely grateful. Thank you so much. So I will talk about my work for about 20-25 minutes, so I have a little presentation to show as well, some pictures, so some slides. And in fact, this is going to be first time ever when I am going to be talking about this book in public, so I am quite, well, anxious, so as you understand. And I hope, that the ideas I would like to share with you, they will resonate with many people. And I was really touched by the story that Dudu, just told us, because I think that in the core of my research, at the core of my personal experience, is that constant, sense of movement, constant sense of traveling, constant sense of going somewhere, So, and I also think that once, someone is a migrant, so this kind of trajectory marks your experience, your life experience ever and forever. So I did left Russia quite a long time ago in the middle of 90s, but I don't think that I have ever arrived, to a new destination. I am in Canada, and I'm very grateful to be working and living here. But I think that I kind of remain, so in between, and I see myself on a journey in a boat, moving towards, my new future, my new land all the time. So I'm going to speak from this perspective of in between, from this perspective of movement. Now I'll try to share my screen right now. I hope it works. Okay. 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 I don't think I am doing anything. I'm sorry. Okay, can you see my screen now? Yeah. Artur, can you see the screen right now? I'm not sure.
Yes, we can, but it's a small box to the right. Maybe Danielle could help us, or let's see. I think there is an icon that we can. Yeah, I just enlarged my screen, so it's full screen now for me, your presentation.
Okay, so you can see.
Whoever,
for everybody to shut down the cameras, only for Yana to be on, because we are facing, the sound is not very good in YouTube, but people can see the presentation, so just Yana stay connected, would be good.
Okay, so I will probably have to go back to the presentation and maybe turn my camera off. That's what you're asking, right?
No, you can stay with your camera on, just show your presentation as you were doing. I'll ask to Matuck to turn off the camera and meet.
Okay. Sorry, those systems are all a little different, right? So anyway, so I'm going to be talking about this book with some proposed definitions, remarks, and examples. And the talk has two distinct parts. So one of them, the first one, is really about the theoretical foundations and thoughts, that went into this making of the book. And the second one, just to focus on one example from the last chapter of the book. So in my book, Performance, Subjectivity, Cosmopolitanism, I studied the connection between contemporary theater and cosmopolitanism, a philosophical condition of social behavior based on our responsibility, respect, and healthy curiosity to the other. Advocating for cosmopolitanism has become a necessity in a world defined by global wars, mass migration, and rise of nationalism. Using empathy, affect, and telling personal stories of displacement through embodied encounter between the actor and the audience, performance arts can serve as a training ground for the social behavior. In the center of this encounter is a new cosmopolitan, a person of divided origins and cultural heritage, someone who speaks many languages and claims different countries as their place of belonging. This ontological split of self, as the participating self and the observing self, becomes the major mechanism for constructing subjectivity in cosmopolitan theater, and thus constitutes the object of my study. Thanks to our ability to speak, act, narrate, and ascribe actions to other persons, we can stage our own vulnerability and our relationships with the world. The embodied self never functions through abstract categories of being. One's corporeality is tightly interconnected with and reflects one's historical situation and sense of the present. Theater has the unique power to stage this encounter of self as other. It favors encounter as a special creative methodology and uses the dialectics of a standstill as the spectator's meeting point with oneself as other. To better understand this dynamic, I suggest a theoretical model of the theatrical encounter as an atomic cell with the divided self of the cosmopolitan artist in its center. This model stems from my previous research in the aesthetics of theater in exile, in which I defined the exilic condition as a past, present, or here-there binary. This binary configures the exile's life journey as a tripartite structure as beginning, middle, and end, in which the journey unfolds from the point of departure to the point of arrival, with no return possible. In this new book, I propose to rethink this trajectory by opening the past-present binary of exile into the simultaneity of cosmopolitanism, a rhizomatic process of becoming that reflects the position of the cosmopolitan subject who is constantly on the move and forced by the condition of labor, politics, or physical and economic upheaval to seek new opportunities elsewhere. This type of intercultural encounter is reflected in cosmopolitan performances, which frequently focus on the multicultural and multilingual urbanite torn between the accelerated time of hyperconsumption and hyperproductivity, and the stillness of nothingness, when an individual feels crushed by the empty period of time in their life. Focusing on multilingualism, autobiographical performance, chorus play, and creating communities of hope, my book examines how today's theater stages this divided subjectivity, both from within, the way we tell stories about ourselves to others, and from without, through the stories the others tell about us. Speaking in the terms of mobility and hope, however, we must remember that not all travelers and traveling are created equal. In my book, I make a fundamental distinction between the so-called jet setters as privileged travelers, whose status in the power geometry of global mobility is defined by their wealth and power, and refugees and asylum seekers whose movement across the space-time continuum is forced and precarious. As a Western academic myself, who travels on a Canadian passport conveniently approved and acknowledged by the international community, I admit that my work is marked by my privileged position and freedom of movement. It was not always like that. My own journey of immigration was marked by various anxieties, hard work, and personal sacrifice. Nevertheless, Nevertheless, I feel compelled to recognize my privilege as a hypermodern individual. Like Marilena Zarulli, who examines the relation between the so-called European refugee crisis and the multiple meanings and performances of success, I analyze performative representations of migration aimed at those of us who have not had a direct experience of forced displacement and whose meaning, therefore, exceeds us. The major question I seek to answer is, what values can the performing arts offer a hypermodern nomad? Indeed, what's hikuba to him or her? Responding to these questions, I follow Bojana Kunst, to who our assumption that art can have political and social impact has become invalid. The only function it can fulfill is to serve as a repository of philosophical observations and emotional experiences. I take this idea further, and I argue that watching a theater performance live and experiencing it as an embodied practice can foster self-reflection. It can create an epiphany, a fortuitous philosophical moment of self-recognition. The cosmopolitan spectator is obliged to contemplate their position as a privileged subject and encouraged to step outside the historical moment in which they live. In this post-Brechtian gesture of alienating self from self, it can impose a moment of recognition. Not only can it make a person of privilege suddenly recognize their other within themselves, it can incite them to take the first step toward an ethical dialogue with the other outside the self. In making the suggestions, however utopian they may sound, I follow Zygmunt Bauman, who advocates for dialogue as the only way to overcome the indifference, if not animosity, that late capitalism produces towards strangers. I also adhere to Erika Fischer-Lichter's argument that the transformative power of performance can involve spectators in an active loop of aesthetic and affective experiences, which invokes questions of ethics and sets in motion the mechanisms of one's encounter with oneself. I examine the performative logic of the encounter as a relational activity and as the rhizomatic stillness of multiple selves. By focusing on the fundamental elements of theater performance, such as language, body, and time and space, I seek to theorize the performative mechanisms involved in conceptualizing, constructing, and performing the new cosmopolitanism. So here I will propose a bit of a definition. In defining the political, artistic, and ethical practices of cosmopolitan theater, I take my inspiration from Rebecca Volkowitz's work on critical cosmopolitanism in literature. A philosophic and artistic practice which reaches beyond the nation, reflects a cosmopolitan artist's personal conditions of movement, encourages multiple points of view, and emphasizes their limited or suspended agency. A product of modernism, critical cosmopolitanism rested upon two principles: an aversion of heroic tones of appropriation and progress, and a suspicion of epistemological privilege, views from above or from the center that assume a constant distinction between who is seeing and what is seen. This viewpoint implied double consciousness, comparison, negation, and persistent self-reflection. The centripetal and centrifugal forces of history and traveling created the patterns of international transgression that characterized this movement, whereas border crossing and cultural encounter constituted its subject matter. Many ideological and artistic tendencies of critical cosmopolitanism find new urgency in contemporary performance practices, since they engage with the political and social consequences of migration. Today's theater of cosmopolitanism is both a social phenomenon and aesthetic condition. As a social phenomenon, cosmopolitan theater is marked by the economic situation and personal mobility of its makers. There is an urgent need to talk about global migration as a cause for transnational encounters, the emergence of global models of economics and their positive and negative outcomes, but also about how this phenomenon trigger the new nationalism, which rejects the global other and embraces the traditional values of the nation state. For these reasons, I study the theatrical events created by transnational theater artists for international audiences, who gather at international theater festivals, and for those urban and cosmopolitan spectators, sometimes migrants themselves, who are concerned with the changing political climate of our time. This practice creates performative encounters of cosmopolitan ecology, characterized by the production of sociality and communal forms of collaboration. In its modes of production, cosmopolitan theater often relies on international capital, labor, and partnership, for its ideological models stem from the principles of interconnectedness that also characterized the social workings of globalization. This financial model can also condition the subject matter of cosmopolitan theater, which frequently has its center as the figure of traveler whose human rights have been violated and for whom the audience's sympathy is elicited. As an artistic practice, cosmopolitan theater addresses the fundamental gap between representation and reenactment, zooming on an individual in crisis, someone in the midst of physical and existential journey to whom the state of personal liminality and has become the new norm. Positioned between cultures, traditions, linguistic practices, and economic models, these individuals identify with many, often conflicting points of view. Simultaneously, they bear allegiance to different nations, while claiming their personal linguistic and cultural position of multiplicity as the new authenticity and truth. Many cosmopolitan performances stage the phenomenon of the divided self to illustrate the psychological and the cultural outcomes of being cosmopolitan, and they use Brechtian estrangement to enable its audience to recognize themselves as subject of divided subjectivity. So now some technical thoughts about this practice. Dramaturgically, cosmopolitan theater uses tactics of fragmentation and deconstruction, multilingual dialogue, autobiographical narratives, space-time simultaneity, audience displacement, and immersion as linking devices between the critical cosmopolitanism of the historical avant-garde and its contemporary forms. It reveals the cosmopolitan artists focused on the self as a creative resource to bridge the transcultural gaps of everyday encounter and the intercultural dramaturgy of the stage. Like new interculturalism, which defines the embodied experiences of hybridity, cosmopolitan theater represents a conceptual, processual, embodied lived condition driven by one's own multiple affiliations to cultures, nations, and faiths. The artist's position as an insider, outsider, results in an embodied view of their own liminality as someone who experiences two or more cultures at the same time. And thus, in its performative manifestations, theatrical cosmopolitanism engages with those cultural exchanges that operate primarily at a corporeal level. Moreover, cosmopolitan artists are multilingual. They rely on the emphatic power of words and turn dramatic dialogue into music. By so doing, they challenge the ideological foundations of the nation state rooted in the dominance of one language, ethnicity, and culture, and make multilingualism the leading paradigm of today's social, political, and cultural interactions between peoples within one nation and across borders. At the level of reception, cosmopolitan theater invites the privileged individual to contemplate their role in a world of increasing social and political precarity. Silvia Yastrovich identifies such reflection as interference, a device of relational aesthetics that connects the performance back to its audience in a gesture of associative thinking and excessive meaning-making, a gesture tightly connected to the very concrete images of social and environmental disasters that take place outside the theatrical space. This theater mobilizes Jill Dolan's utopian communities of hope as a social anti-structure of equal individuals. A direct, immediate, and total confrontation of human identities, communities can be linked with spontaneity, and freedom. A place of in-betweenness, it is dedicated to loudness and sacredness, homogeneity and comradeship. Refugees moving from space to space as ever-changing communities of strangers exemplify this concept. Often, these moving formations are temporary and appear on the societal margins, but they are distinguished by social practices that employ, and thus they often construct effective subjects and effective citizenship. A site-specific, sonically based, and one-to-one immersive project, How I Run 3 Plays to iPod, created by Ken Cameron from Calgary, uses relational dramaturgy of encounter to create such utopian communities. It relies on Foucault's heterotopia as its storytelling device, and it imagines its spectators navigating the space of performance individually by listening to an iPod. So now I'm going to go into this example, and this is the second part of my presentation. And this particular example comes from the third part of the book, which focuses on studying communal experiences of spectatorship as this kind of example of creating new cosmopolitanism. Performance How I Run was inspired by the 30 years of Iran's history after its Islamic Revolution in 1979. It reflects experiences of migration told by Iranian Canadians, specifically the story of the political blogger Hossein Derakhshan, who upon a visit to Iran in 2008 was arrested and held without trial for 400 days, to be sentenced to 19 years in prison. A one-to-one site-specific performance that takes place in a public library, How I Run, uses encounter both as a dramaturgical device and as a gesture of theoretical conceptualization. When you arrive at the library, you are asked to choose between a red, white, or green iPod, the 3 colors of the Iranian flag. Depending on which iPod you choose, you follow one of 3 protagonists through a story that spans 30 years. The story that I followed focused on Ramin, who left his wife and son in Iran to immigrate to Canada. Now a security guard in one of the local libraries, Ramin meets another librarian, Emily, an American expatriate who immigrated from the US to Canada to accompany her husband, a draft dodger from the Vietnam campaign. The random connection between these 2 characters and the impossibility of a happy ending for either of them is translated into the performative structures of the production. The iPod is the major dramaturgical space of this production. To Cameron, listening to iPod, which is set on shuffle, translates into experiences of isolation, randomness, and sociability. Every spectator experiences a story route differently. Depending on how a shuffle mechanism customizes the scenes, the meaning and the focus of the story changes. This listening experience mirrors our practices of walking, encounter, and the gaze, and thus iPod turns into a miniature version of theatrical heterotopia. Shuffling and randomness lead to the nonlinearity, fragmentation, and memory gaps in our listening process. This effect somewhat mimic the way migrants experience and remember their travel. This narrative structure of shuffling and randomness suggests the trauma of being uprooted and justifies the nonlinear dramaturgy. The telling can leap forward or jump back in time. But what it also reveals is that for many immigrants, the experience of moving into another place is nonlinear, as they feel disconnected from the place of their origin and from the place of their new home. Random objects, unexpected encounters, and unfamiliar places might trigger migrants' memories. In designing the points of intersection between the different routes of How I Run and its soundscapes, Cameron mobilizes fragmentation of the immigrant experience. So here is the map, that we're given, when we travel, when we arrive, to experience this traveling show, traveling route, traveling narrative, and I'm going to talk about it. How I Run is imagined as a guided city tour. As we choose our iPods, we are given a small three-color map that helps us navigate the space of this installation. The map allows you to follow your trajectory through both the narrative and the library, and makes clearer your partial view of the narrative. By forcing every spectator to be responsible for their next move, the mapping causes dislocation, spatial confusion, and self-estrangement, and thus creates new experiential conditions of performance. Each library installation contains 24 discrete stations that support the story. Several of these locations are shared points among the narrative lines, with only a few unique to one of the three paths. Designer Anton de Groot sets the overall vision with stations that represent bedrooms, an overturned kitchen, and several more abstract installations, addressing issues such as travel, letters from home, resumes for jobs, and in the new homeland. In designing these junction points between different routes of How I Run, Cameron makes each single location serve as a reference point to different narrative movements in the story. So several spectators might find themselves at the side of one exhibit, listening to separate sequences of the dialogue. This way, shuffling and randomness create a sense of uncanny simultaneity. Imagine a situation: several people are standing in the space of a single room. Each is listening to their iPod and reacting differently to the dialogue they hear. There is a bedroom and a quiet reading room. There is a circle of children's shoes. There's artifacts and pieces of the lives of three characters that get wrapped into a story, with the narrative pulling each listener deep into a tale. But there are no characters, actors to watch or follow, only the soundscape of your iPod. Every station reveals a new section of the story, which comes together only at the very end, when the group gathers in the neutral zone of the after-show space to exchange information and create closure. Walking creates pockets of not knowing and suspense that border on a dream experience when spectators loosen their personal control mechanisms and begin to trust the shuffling apparatus of the iPod. This experience makes our minds wander and turn the emancipated spectator, the agent, into a traveler or flaneur lost in the labyrinth. In the uncertainty as to the route and their need to move through the experience, spectators begin to resemble migrants. They suddenly realize that they are the guests, not the hosts in this performative city. Using a public library at the play's performative site gives How I Run special meaning. The public library is often the first point of contact with Canadian Society for Immigrants, serving them not only as a repository of knowledge, since there are books and other learning materials there that migrants can consult, but also as a space of safety, the last fortress of Western democracy. There is therefore a deeply thought-through connection between the physical site of How I Run and its fictional space, manifested through a theatrical heterotopia, a space of memory and a juncture of time put together within the enclosed segmented space observed at every point. As the play unfolds, each spectator encounters other people who might be visiting the same sites, but listening to different narrations through their own iPods. This juncture of narratives and visitations turns How I Run into a collective repository of memories and associations. The way the routes intersect, overlap, and somewhat repeat each other creates a theatrical heterotopia, whereby the library itself, a place of fantasy, reflections, and memory, becomes a performative counter-site. The public library space carries personal importance for Ken Cameron, who started working on the script in Calgary Public Library. As the play developed, he became a silent observer of its inner creative folds, watching how the space of the library slowly influenced the play's characters and stories. Cameron realized that much like any artwork of relational aesthetics, How I Run referred to and mobilized people's need for social engagement. It addressed the fundamental ground of spectating, the spectator's complexity of self-consciousness in the presence of others. a type of intersubjectivity that wrestles with embarrassment and our other effective responses to being with other people and being visible to them. It created intimate, implicated, embodied, and thus emancipated spectatorship. The final dramaturgical principle of making How I Run is socialization, used as a device of mapping the performance space and as a strategy of its reception, with the production's second act, the gathering of a community, crowning the experience and thus serving the play as a ritual of communal witnessing. Act 2 is a meeting point for the spectators and the director to exchange impressions and thoughts about the experiential part of the event. Ken Cameron acts as a facilitator of this exchange and as a spectator of the performative action of the audience. This exchange helps one construct a sense of community. As spectators come together to discuss the story they have just witnessed and to process their personal, physical, emotional, and affectual journeys, they also fill in the narrative blanks. They all agree, listening to the stories through the iPod and simultaneously experiencing the narration through the act of walking creates a space of safety to engage with the production, but also foregrounds each participant's vulnerability. The way the audience members connect auditory and spatial information in their minds creates a cognitive confusion that resonates in their navigation of the performance space and defines the experience as a meeting with the self. To conclude, in its complex systems of encounters, gazing, and listening, How I Run relies on three performative dimensions: the visual, what we see and who sees us; audio, what we hear and who hears us; and movement, how much we asked to physically move during the show and how non-restricted this movement is. In its spatial dramaturgy, it brings to life a metaphor of migration. The performance exploits techniques of fragmentation, montage, and patterning to challenge the idea of the linear, self-contained, and coherent narratives of travel. The play speaks about our world today, and it foregrounds theater viewing as social and communal activity, and as a crossover of centrifugal and centripetal vectors of mobility. Finally, it illustrates that telling stories of traveling and confronting the bodies of the performers with the bodies of spectators in the imminence of the space of a live performance, theater of cosmopolitanism puts the models of interpersonal communication that we already practice on a daily basis into a spotlight. It creates utopian communities of hope in which individuals come together to form a post-migratory society of difference. This performative experience stipulates a positive role for the stranger, and instead of mobilizing a multicultural consensus, it presents stranger as a figure which forces us to think creatively about diversity and reminds us that one-size-fits-all social policies fail to account for the unpredictability of the social relations which strangeness can engender. This way, theater of cosmopolitanism turns a nameless traveler, a migrant, into a proper individual, someone who possesses personal history, memory, and agency. Thank you. So I stop sharing my slide here. And I would like to thank everybody for your patience. And thanks.
Congratulations, Yana Meerzon. It was amazing for us to listen to you. I think there are many students from arts universities and arts colleges, and also a lot of artists, migrants too, that are with us talking about cosmopolitanism. A few months ago, there was a murder in São Paulo of a migrant from Angola, so it's very important to talk about it. So now, after your amazing presentation, we want to bring Henry Daniel with us. I don't know if he's able to connect now. We will call him from the broadcasting here.
So bravo, bravo. It was really enlightening I really enjoy listening to you and get in contact with your ideas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yana. It was a pleasure listening to you and looking at those images.
Looking forward to your talk, Henry. Thank you.
So, Henry, Danielle, I think I'm not sure if we set, like, maybe you talk now and afterwards we ask questions to both of you. Do you feel comfortable?
Yes, I'm fine with it.
Do you agree also, Yana? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. That's fine. Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay. So, Henry, Danielle, now you can start talking and presenting your proposals and ideas. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for inviting me. I want to unabashedly introduce my book. So I'll be reading from the prologue of the book. The book has not been published as yet. It's under contract with Intellect. So I just sent it off. So it should be available, I guess, within the next year or so.
Congratulations.
But the book is also connected to an online research archive. And that archive has a lot of the choreographic work that I do, because I think it's really important for the reader to be able to see the choreographic works in which some of these concepts and ideas are linked to. So what I do is something called research creation in Canada. In the UK, they call it practice as research, and it has a different set of names in different places: art as research, performance as research, practice as research, research creation. The idea is that the artistic work becomes the center of not just a dialogue, but the process of how knowledge is generated, searched, and researched. So what I'll do now is read you. If you see my eyes wandering, I'm actually looking at a second screen. I'll read you the prologue from the book that will give you a little bit of context. And then what I will do is I'll show you part of a work that's called Nomadas, the Spanish word for nomads, a work that has been presented in a number of different ways, as an art installation, as a live performance, and as a short, I would say a short film. It's a 12-minute incarnation of a three-channel video installation and a 6-channel sound installation. So here we go with the prologue. The book is called Going West to Find East, Going East to Find West, Re-Choreographing Cortical and Cartographic Maps. Beginning this book with a prologue and ending with an epilogue, between which are 7 chapters with multiple scenes that function as intermissions, interruptions, and resumptions in a dramatic play, I am suggesting that it functions as a kind of performance. The links to my online archive, where some of the dance material being discussed here can be seen and manipulated by the reader, helps to support that idea. However, the book is also an academic document where the 3 acts with their 7 chapters knit together a set of arguments concerning relationships between dance, choreography, and performance, and the search for and generation of new knowledge. The idea here is to combine my extensive background as a professional dancer, choreographer, with my academic scholarship and an enduring interest in transdisciplinarity as a coming together of what may seem as disparate ideas, but which, to me at least, permits a better understanding of dance and choreography as practices that allow us to claim embodied knowledge. The writing style of the book, therefore, is at times autobiographic and at times critical in a scholarly sense. However, because of its objective, it is a hybrid form of both. In fact, it is sometimes like a puzzle that asks the reader, my audience, to put the pieces together in their own way if they are truly interested in understanding the unique perspective my writing offers. This is deliberate. Part of this strategy has to do with my attempts to undermine the accepted epistemological and ontological paradigms that a Western European scholastic tradition has passed on to those of us who were forced to give up our own ancestral ways of being and thinking in the world in favor of a system that colonial powers imposed on us. But just as my own ancestors were asked to adopt the institutional structures and educational mandates that colonialism provided, which these same ancestors messed with, and in so doing created new hybrid structures that contained elements from their own epistemological and ontological past, so too am I messing with the accepted notions of what the arguments and disciplinary norms for proper critical debate in a document should look, read, and feel like. I begin with an hypothesis, which claims that human beings are cognitively embodied through their own lived experiences of movement through space and time. The spaces we inhabit and the practices we engage in are documented through cortical and cartographic maps. In short, as we inhabit and move through spaces, our brains organize our experiences into unique cortical and spatial maps, which eventually determine how we see and deal with, i.e., become subjects in a world that we also help create. It is therefore extremely critical for our own survival that we are not deprived of opportunities to exercise these creative instincts. Cartography is the discipline that deals with the conception, production, dissemination, representation, and study of maps of geographical territory, while cortical mapping is the method by which the brain, through the spine and the peripheral nervous system, dynamically represents relationships between the body and its movement experiences in space-time. Since this representation is an internal process of the brain that organizes and interprets space-time relationships, we can say that the human body, moving through space and time, presents an opportunity to claim the information in those spaces as personal knowledge. Thus, if dance is the intentional movement of bodies that leads to an experience in space-time, then choreography becomes the deliberate organization of those movements into coherent and meaningful structures towards some specific goal. In other words, movement is analogous to thought unfolding. And through dance and choreography, that unfolding becomes an opportunity to understand and therefore claim the knowledge that is in the body as well as in the spaces through which it travels. If we wish to fully know and understand ourselves and our relationship to the rest of organic life, unique investigative procedures based on sound theories of performance need to be developed. This book is an attempt to ground a theory of practice that pursues such a path. With this hypothesis, I can begin to pose questions such as, how are mental, emotional, and physical maps generated and stored within the body as short and long-term memories? And how are they articulated through our actions as the capacity for embodied knowing? How does the rearticulation and/or reorganization of these movement maps create a dynamic such that new knowledge can emerge? And most importantly, what happens in and through the body as people become displaced from their lived environments? Finally, how can the dancer, choreographer, or performing artist facilitate a shift in the audience's perceptual landscape for them to share the deeply lived experiences that are foundational to that knowledge? These are some of the fundamental questions that inform my decades-long choreographic practice, in which I utilize new technologies as part of my experimental toolkit. To fully appreciate where some of the ideas in this publication originate and why they're being presented here in this format, the reader should know that I come from a colonial upbringing. My ancestors were forcibly removed from their homes on the African continent and brought to the New World as slaves. This fact inevitably influences the way that concepts such as identity, self, performance, embodied knowledge, and becoming are framed throughout this document. Initially, I was educated in an all-boys school, Naparima College, founded on the Caribbean island of Trinidad by Canadian Presbyterian missionaries for the sons of Indian indentured laborers brought in to replace the emancipated African slaves. I repeat that. Initially, I was educated in an all-boys school, Naparima College, founded on the Caribbean island of Trinidad by Canadian Presbyterian missionaries for the sons of Indian indentured laborers brought in to replace the emancipated African slaves. My theater training began in this environment. I subsequently received additional professional, artistic, and intellectual training in the USA, the UK, and Germany, widely practicing my craft in each of these countries while touring internationally. Extensive travel and learning some of the languages in countries where I lived widened my perspectives, but also left me feeling somewhat nomadic. I begin this book, therefore, with a statement of my position as displaced and dislocated, a condition that I argue applies to those bodies that have had to perform their way through a range of geopolitical, socio-economic, and psychological frameworks that colonizing processes have imposed on them. I also propose a method for decolonization and for claiming the information in one's own body and its experiences and inheritances in space-time as personal knowledge. I do so by referencing as a starting place an historical disruption, the arrival of Columbus in the Americas that has determined the futures of historically colonized peoples in the spaces they currently find themselves. The title, Going West to Find East, Going East to Find West, begins as a performative conjecture, with the 15th century Columbian initiative playing a prominent role in how transnational movements of bodies have created and continue to create new movement maps across extended physical, psychological, and geographic spaces. A key premise of the book's argument is that the framing and overt compartmentalization of knowledge that a Western European Enlightenment agenda, informed by a Cartesian dictate, imposed on the knowledge acquisition process served to marginalize large groups of others, and that current institutional processes continue to present serious challenges to the efforts by these others to redefine their role in contemporary neoliberal societies. I therefore suggest that bringing a new approach to the table, a transdisciplinary and transcultural one that engages more equitably with contrasting views, frameworks, and philosophies, can address some of these inherited imbalances. To this end, I organized and led 4 multi-year choreographic research projects. The first was Transnet from 2003 to 2005. Transnet investigated the potential for a transdisciplinary dialogue between artists and scientists on notions of performance that range from human expressive behavior to computation efficiency and optimization in digital systems. The Touched project, 2007 to 2010, looked at how human beings and new technologies together create a dynamic systems ecology that challenges the notion of agency in both humans and technological systems. The third, Project Barca from 2011 to 2014, looked at the implications of a colonialist, expansionist agenda that began with attempts by Europeans to reach a fabled East by going West. Inverting the phrase to going East to find West, and playing on the inherent paradox of going in either direction to find the other, the project explored how the concept of circumnavigation opened opportunities for cultural encounters that would fundamentally impact the fates of many. The fourth and final project, Contemporary Nomads, 2017 to 2021, sought to extend the scope of what cultural theorist Stuart Hall described as, quote, the prototype of the modern or postmodern New World nomad, continually moving between center and periphery, unquote, in an attempt to establish a presence in the world. This New World presence, according to Hall, is not so much power as ground, place, territory, the juncture point where the many cultural tributaries meet, the empty land, the European colonizers emptied it, where strangers from every part of the globe collided. The trajectory of these 4 multi-year projects addressed a set of questions that are all related to an exploration of dance and choreography and performance in general as 1, key practices for expanding awareness of the multiple dimensions of self. 2, a means of experimentally drawing out and testing knowledge about bodies and their relationship to space, time, and identity. And 3, valid vehicles for both artistic and academic research. Also, as the 3 short quotes at the beginning of this prologue suggest, I'm sorry I didn't read them, I am interested in the epistemological basis that different disciplines and cultures use to speak about the experience of knowing, as well as the methods they use to explore these knowledges. And I'll read those 3 quotes right now. To have a mind is to have the ability to reason and to be sensitive to reasons in thought, feeling, and action. Aka 2014. The second one, the Tibetan word for mind, which is sem, covers not just the realm of thought, but also that of emotion. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso. And the third one, in our direct and immediate awareness of the body, we know it primarily through the various tactile sensations involved in any activity of touching something. Welton, 1998. So in those three quotes, I'm actually looking at those three spaces, if one could call it that, what we call the mind, what we call the emotion, and what we call the physical body. So what I'd like to do now, I don't know how much time I have left. How am I doing, Daniel? Hello?
I'm here, Daniel.
How am I doing for time?
Yeah. Do you need much more time?
I wanted to show the video now. Okay. So I'll show you what this video I will show you now is really the representation of the installation I mentioned earlier.
So I'll ask you while broadcasting this video to turn off your camera so the image is bigger for spectators to watch, okay?
Okay. So are you seeing my screen now?
Yes, we are seeing. Yes. Okay.
Okay. So I believe there is a little symbol on the right side of your screen that allows your entire screen to be my video. So this is a 10-minute section of the installation. I will briefly say that there are 7 different languages in this installation. And there are a number of speakers who are speaking, but the text is never synchronous with the images that you are looking at. And the way the installation is set up in a room, you have to see the installation, it's rotating. But every time the video, the 3 videos are rotating at different times. And the sound is also rotating. They're all at different lengths. So the same sound is never repeated at the same image. So you have to see the installation several times to actually know who is speaking.
Mazina ganjile Katrina Tatsimgami, Mazina Gonyagay, Awapanindaga, Kampala, Uganda, East Africa. Uganda, yes, Concadium one message has a trainer to the message. Chimpanian Novasa Tura Hantona, Coca Cola, Kashangabanto Vincent, Dijo, work. Wakwatina wakavita toka every wakavamanya so during Islam 22 Normans 22 Yamana Vinceji has a 22 sort of interval.
Number one, okay? Mai là mình chơi cái khuyên mai quên nó luôn nhỉ?
You see people from everywhere, their cultures, their traditions, and their languages. But I think that's what's happening in Venezuela. It's not. Of course, migrations are usually negative in some way. I mean, people are moving out to a different country because they want something better. So that means they're not getting what they want in their countries. But I feel that Venezuela has been a very special case because, or maybe it's affecting me in a different way because I can actually relate to what's happening. I've seen many of my friends, many of my family members moving out, and what's happening, it's extremely sad. It's very, it's a shame to see that you have to leave the place where many people feel they belong, and it feels more like an obligation, like you have to do it. If you don't leave, then you're definitely. So for me, that's very hurtful. I just feel that nobody should be going through that sort of situation or dilemma where they need to go to a different place to have a better life, to have a life, because people nowadays, they work so much, they are striving for so much.
That's what I could, but there is a lot that hasn't been for the last, I would say at least 10 years. I can tell you that I have family that only eats once or twice a day. I have family members get food from the garbage. When my dad was still in Venezuela, he had employees that only ate once a day because they had kids and they couldn't afford eating 3 meals a day. So, pretty bad.
I always knew that I was Chinese, and I was interested in the history of China, because I was interested in the dynasty, how they go from one to the next one, and I don't have any problem with being ashamed of it, because I know a lot of people who were born here really feel ashamed of, like, you know, oh, you're from China, or you're from China, that kind of thing. So I don't really have any problem, you know, I don't feel that being ashamed at all. I'm actually very proud. I know how China has thousands of years of history. Yeah. So I always pass along to my kids and you guys too. And I remember when they were young, I asked them, like, are you Chinese or Canadian? Mm-hmm. And then right away you guys said, oh, I'm Canadian. Mm-hmm. What I did was, like, put them up into the mirror and I said, what do you see? What do you see in the mirror? What color is your hair? Mm-hmm. What color is your eye? What color is your skin? I know that we don't want to identify just based on our skin, right? Yeah. The people that way. but I always want to make sure that you guys have your own heritage, that you would never be ashamed of it. And that's why I put up in the mirror and asked you that question.
Thanks, Mom.
Until you say, oh, yeah, okay.
I guess I'm kind of Chinese, too.
Not kind of, you're Chinese.
Yes.
Maybe I just need to experience all of these different places and situations in order to realize where I truly belong. So maybe I have already found the place where I belong. I'm not sure yet. But yeah, I would definitely keep moving till I find it, or till I feel that I can call somewhere home completely.
Where are you from? I hate that question. If it means ancestry, then yo soy de Colombia y España. If it means where I was born, I am Mexican. If it means where I pay my taxes, my bills, where I see my doctor, I am from Canada. If it means where I grew up as a child, I'm from Texas. So I never really know how to answer that question. All I know is that home to me doesn't seem like a place to return to. I'm envious of those who have found some place to go back to. Right now, nowhere is home. Some say home isn't a place, but a feeling where you feel deeply intimate and connected with yourself. And if that's the case, I don't want to feel at home. Maybe home is a person, perhaps a lover I've yet to meet. It could be my mother. Who am I kidding? They are them and I am me. And you can't make a home out of a human being. Too. Last night, I was watching the sunset at English Bay, and I'm standing there and feeling the water push to my ankles and then pull, and I'm looking out as far as I can. And I think about the history of this Coast Salish territory, and I try to imagine all the different people who have stood here before me, feeling the same water push and pull at their ankles. I think of Columbus arriving to land after being in water for weeks, of refugees arriving to shore. I look down at my feet and wonder what this land has witnessed. And in this moment, I don't feel alone at all. And then I just sort of went quiet. I don't know, so maybe last night was a type of home for me. Great. There's a type of healing that I believe will happen to me when my feet truly touch ground. A type of healing where my body claims the soil beneath it and I'm able to go deep. To dig deep into the rot of my life and its surroundings with my own two hands. 4. Oh God, is this earth mine? Can I even call it mine? Is any of it ours? I don't know what belongs to me or what I belong to. And belong, what an encasing word. I mean, I don't want to be owned or held or possessed by anything. But belonging to myself seems so insubstantial. But maybe ownership is insubstantial. I don't know. 5. Hoy cuando estaba regresando de Nueva York, Nena me dijo, ahora estamos en tu país. Y me sentí triste porque no siento que tengo un país. Quiero ser solo de Colombia para que tengo ese patriotismo y estar más conectada con toda mi familia. Quiero solo pensar en español y solo hablar en español, porque tal vez luego me sentiría como si finalmente soy parte de una cultura completamente.
Oh, thank you for the video, Daniel. It was very nice to see your performance. I have to say it's very different to see in the place, in the installation, and watching for the video. But people is already asking if you can provide the link so they can watch it and share. But I'll ask Yana Meerzon to turn on the camera too, so we can talk a little bit about the experience of exchanging ideas and I have a few questions for you. I think Matuck has too. And we have people in YouTube, so there's 50 people with us and more people that have been through the conference. So thank you very much for the speeches. And what do you talk, Matuck?
So thank you, Daniel, for your lecture. It was really amazing. It was a kind of a poetic performance to look to your eyes and hear your voice and your ideas and your eyes. It was really nice. So I do have some.
Momentito, por favor. I just put the link to the video on the chat in case anyone wants to go look at the page.
Okay. Actually, I was very curious to read your texts too. Like, if you can share part of your writing. I know your book was not published yet, so you may not be allowed to disseminate it altogether, like everything. But if you can choose a part of it or something, because that could be interesting for us to read, a fragment of your writing. I think we cannot hear your voice. Okay, anyway.
No, I can do that.
Oh, okay. So, I want to ask a question maybe for both of you, but I think it's more fitting for Yana. And it's about the terminology of the word performance and how it's used in performance art, and then which was like a very important genre in contemporary arts, and it became something really impressive because it's the actual action of the artists in museums, eventually in galleries and things. So. And I think it's connected with what Henry Daniel was saying about embodied knowledge, like the body itself is present. And I'm curious to know about from you, to listen from both of you, what are your thoughts about performance art and the importance of the relevance of performance art, not only for contemporary art, visual arts, but also to theater. And and how is the term performance understood in Yana's writings and eventually in Henry Daniel? So that was my first thought to ask you guys. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Artur, for this question. So before I actually pick it up, I would like to just comment on what I heard, Henry was saying, and say congratulations, really. It's really, I was fascinated by how many ideas we actually share. I knew about your work a little bit before, so but I'm absolutely fascinated, by the concepts of movement, belonging, so, and all those ideas, that you proposed, I felt, we were kind of writing the same paper, maybe, if I could, so I'm just so excited about it, so I just wanted to make the comment. And now going back to the question Artur asked about performance, well, it's been a long story, right? It's a long tradition of verifying terminology and sort of, playing with terminology. Of course, I think that we kind of passed that dichotomy, past the time when we were trying to verify the difference between theater, which is more traditional, right, and performance, which comes more from the cultural studies sort of understanding of things. I think that contemporary performance, contemporary theater, they really intermingle, intersect, so, and sometimes, I prefer to talk about theater is something that happens, in the designated space, very specifically in a space of, like it's a theatrical space, which has been designated traditionally to particular, performative examples and works, and performance is much broader, right? So it's it allows us to speak of very different genres, as well as cultural work, right, as well as activist work, So, so performance really is this kind of a notion, that allows me to travel freely, from the very traditional, very confined space of theatrical art, to the installations, to the activism, to the works, that focus on the immersive sort of, work of the audience, So I really welcome, the opportunities, that term, gives me. I do take time, to define very specifically what kind of, works of art, I'm looking at, So, and they're very different, So, and it's important, of course, for me and for everybody to say, so what kind of forms, what kind of genres, so we're specifically looking at, but at the same time, I think that this term performance, is much more inviting, so, and much more generous in a way, for us to think about very different things. Yeah, so I think maybe Henry has something to add, to this, so, but this is where I am with this idea. Mm-hmm.
And two things I agree with Yana's description. One, she says she takes, I'm sorry, there's probably some noise in the background here. With she says she defines it if she speaks of theater or whatever it is, she makes an attempt to define it within a specific context. But also, she also says that it's a term that she finds it convenient to use also because, I'm not saying this correctly, that best describes a whole lot of things that she does. So one must, I think when we use the term performance, it's such a broad term that every time we use it, we should define it within particular context. And I think she takes her time to do that whenever she's talking. If she talks about theater, if she talks about dance, if she talks about everyday behavior. So in each context, you must give an individual definition. In my talk, I remember saying, if I can find the sentence again, I used the word performance in terms of human expressivity, but I also said that I see performance as, let me find the exact term. Okay, let's just give me a quick minute. Computation, efficiency, and within digital systems. Now, when very often that term performance is used in the sciences, in relation to computing technologies, in relation to how well certain kinds of machines perform accurately within a particular kind of context. And since I'm very interested in my work in how different kinds of technologies interact with human beings, I'm interested in that space between how human beings look at the idea of performance, how machines, quote unquote, perform, but also in a cultural sense, how different cultures look at that idea of expressing of an expressivity. For example, there was a work I did many years ago called Shango Meets Ogun. And I think you, Professor Matuck, you know exactly who I'm talking about. We've gone into the orishas in West African culture now. Now, I did that work at the same time I was doing another piece based on futurism, that Italian movement that was looking at the rise of industrialism and technology at the beginning of the 20th century. And I put these two pieces together because I was interested in two things: how a colonialist European agenda looked at the notion of who is human and what is human. Sylvia Wynter talks a lot about that. They didn't see Black people as humans. But during futurism, Marinetti was very, very much interested in the Black body and how that body was performing, because he thought it actually seemed very much, it fitted very much with his idea of the machine, that exciting thing that moves forward. But I was also looking at the West African idea of not only physical obvious space, but a relationship to spiritual space, which I see as a corollary to virtual space. So in that West African idea of physicality and body, there is a world that is divided into three spaces: the world of the living, the world of the ancestors, and the world of the unborn. These are different spatial configurations, different physical spatial ideas. So I was interested, it's very complex, but I was interested in what do we mean by human, what do we mean by machine, and what other kinds of spaces these two entities can inhabit. You know, in the West African culture, you know, you can go into that space where, almost like a shaman, you visit this other space and then you bring information back. Human beings now, what we're doing, we're looking to the virtual space of technology as a space where we go to and then come back to reality. I see relations between these kinds of spaces, and one of the things I'm interested in is how do we perform in these different kinds of spaces, and how does performance change? How does a definition of performance change when you visit these kinds of spaces? I hope I'm not too complex.
So I thought it was really stimulating to our thoughts, and it was, I'm not sure, it is complex. To tell you the truth, it is complex. And it's, and I think to fully understand your thought better, Henry, I'll have to read some of your writing and really study more. And the same goes to Yana. So I want to ask like a more provocative question, maybe. Okay. And it starts like with your stories that maybe they have some similarities, like Yana comes from Russia, and then Henry Daniel comes from Trinidad Tobago, but he has a whole ancestry from Africa. And then I see, as far as I know from the works of both of you, you are, Yana, it's more a historian, a theoretician, and Henry, maybe it's more like a video maker, an installation artist, and everything. So I wanna know, like, how your personal history or your cultural history has influenced in your actual work, in theory and everything. And also another thing I'm curious, like Yana Meerzon, for me, it doesn't sound like a Russian name. And so I want to know if, like, your identity, how is your identity with your name, and if you change your name along your history. And also Henry, anyhow, for me, it sounds like a French name, and I wonder, like, do you have maybe a Trinidadian name or an African name? So I'm curious to know, like, both of you are connected with writing, you're publishing books, but how about your personal history, your own body? Like, have you guys written, like, your own personal memories or something? So I want to be provocative. Or maybe, like, just choose to use all this cultural background.
Right.
Theories. Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Artur, for this question. So it's in one of the videos that Henry showed us, shared, there's a lovely woman who says, I hate that question, when they ask him where you come from. So thank you. Yeah, that's exactly, Yeah. Okay. Where do I come from? Yes, it is totally my name. The last name is the name of my father. So I'm of Jewish origin, but I'm not a practicing Jew, and I'm coming from Russia. So it's always been an interesting situation for Soviet Jews, so who were not practicing, but they look differently. Their last names, were quite different. And so since my childhood, people would recognize me, who I am, that I'm different, just by my last name. And, so I kind of look that, as well. But when it comes to identification, cultural identification, of course, I grew up in Russia. I grew up with Russian language, with Russian culture, with understanding of Christianity, and Orthodox Christianity is something that really makes, so the basis of Russian literature, Russian fine arts, and in some cases Russian theater as well, So when it comes to understanding of methodology and how we look at performances and how we look at books and plays, so I'm a hybrid. I think that as a professional, and you can definitely tell it, in all my writings, so the way I write, the way I approach, my subject matter, and so on. So I believe that lots of methodologies, that I learned, back at home, so they were not probably named, so there is a very strong tradition of historical analysis and theater criticism as writing reviews, in Russian theater studies, so, and I come from that. But I also think that we were taught, probably without really naming those names, so we were taught the basics of structural analysis, so, and when I came to Canada, I met Professor Veronica Ambros from Czech Republic, who introduced me to the writings of the Prague School, and to the writings of the structural methodologists and of the Prague School theoreticians, so, and since that time, so lots of things, really came into place, for me. And I don't think that methodologically, so my tools have changed, so it's a combination of structural analysis, which is rooted in the contextualization of my subject matter within the historical and cultural context where it originates, because I really think that it's very, very important to keep that thing in mind, to remember where things come from, right? So because theater is really the product of its own time, as much as our writing is a product of our own time. And I think that we really must, so it's our responsibility to keep that knowledge in mind, So, and of course, when I arrived to Canada, so lots of philosophy, social theories, especially social theories, I did, study here in Canada. And when it comes to language of expression, like my personal joke goes like, for 20-something odd years, so I have been learning the terminology, the language of English language academia, the American and UK, and I think I'm in the process, so it's never-ending process of understanding where you are, so understanding how your target audience speaks, so what your target audience knows, and in this case, your target reader. Right, and I guess I stopped writing in Russian, a long time ago. I'm writing in English. I'm speaking English. I'm teaching in English. So becomes then my responsibility to understand, how my readers, my students, my audience functions and how it works, so I can reach them, in their language, So, and I think that's part of what dialogue, for me, dialogue is, so is to be open to other people, to anticipate, so the other people's knowledge and to kind of speak to that without necessary sort of, discarding your own experience, right? So, and my, just the last thing, I think, so the thing that I kind of practice and I repeat on the daily basis, that it's very important to meet in the middle. We can be sitting from different corners of the space, whatever space we occupy, Zoom space, classroom space, performance space, but it's very important to make an effort to meet in the middle, so and negotiate as much as we can what we know, what we bring into the space, and what others know and bring into that, so to me, this, work on cosmopolitanism was sort of defined by this thinking. Yeah, so that's probably my response to that question. Yeah, so.
So thank you. That was really nice. It was interesting to hear.
I think one of the fundamental concepts that I have in this book is related to the hypothesis I stated earlier on. I think we are fragmented beings with layered consciousnesses. When I say fragmented, it's almost like we are different individualities. There's the Trinidadian Henry, there's the German Henry, there is the British Henry, there's the Canadian Henry. Of course, I was born in the Caribbean. I lived for an extensive amount of time in Germany, in the UK, and now in Canada. And there are things, for example, that I feel I can best express in German. I mean, you look at me, I'm not German. Then there are things from living in the United States, I feel sometimes as if part of me belongs in that decade that I spent in the US. And then there are certain things that people ask me that crazy question, where I'm from. Maybe just to stop any further questions, I'll say I'm Trinidadian. Yeah, but then they listen to my voice and they say, are you French? I hear a little bit of French language in there, and maybe a little bit of British. I think we are very complex beings, very fragmented beings, and what we're trying to do is to assimilate all those bits, all those identities into something we can say, okay, this is Henry, but Henry is a complex person. We all are very complex people. Another thing that I wanted, because I think, I'm not sure if I ever mentioned to you, Yana, I did quote you in my book, and I want to read that little section here. This is in the part 3 of the book, where I start talking about the project Contemporary Nomads. And it actually begins with a short quote from Derek Walcott's The Arkansas Testament. And it's very, very poetic. I actually worked with Derek Walcott back in Trinidad many years ago. I want to read it to you because it's beautiful. It starts like this. I stared back at the Celotex ceiling of room 16, my coat still on, for minutes as the key warmed my palm. TV, telephone, maid service, and a sense of the parking lot through cinder blocks, homesick for islands with fringed shores like the mustard gold coverlet. A roach crossed its oceanic carpet with scurrying oars to a south that it knew, calm shallows of crystalline green. I studied again how glare dies on a wall, till a complex neon scribbled its signature. Oh, it's gorgeous. And this is the paragraph I read here. The concept of the modern day nomad has been addressed by numerous writers from quite different perspectives. I draw brief definition here to just 4 of them as a way to introduce my last multi-year research project, which is Contemporary Nomads. The feminist scholar Rosie Braidotti wrote that the nomadism she presented as a theoretical option was also an existential condition that translated into a style of thinking and a mode of writing. Stuart Hall spoke of the complex circular destiny of the New World nomad, constantly moving between center and periphery. Yana Meerzon claimed that there is a kind of nomadic consciousness in those who, quote, by force or by choice, find themselves on other shores, and for whom the hardship of exile is both an existential ordeal and an opportunity to exercise their creative abilities, professional competence, and artistic resources, unquote. In the Arkansas statement, Derek Walcott embodies Meerzon's perspective as we find the already famous but not yet Nobel laureate poet-playwright staring back at the ceiling of a motel room, homesick for an island home in the Caribbean, and poetically musing over the cockroach that scurries across the carpet. So I think Walcott is describing this condition we're all grappling with and this question you're asking, Professor Matuck. We have this complexity is autobiographic. It's what we've been taught. It's what the places we were. Like, for example, when I started speaking, I told you I was born on the Caribbean island of Trinidad and Tobago. I was educated in a Naparima College, which was a college for all boys that was created by Canadian Presbyterian missionaries for the sons of East Indian indentured laborers who were brought in to replace the African slaves. So this complexity is just like taught by Canadians. Our exams were sent to the University of Cambridge in London to be corrected. So here am I in the Caribbean. The exams that I'm writing are being sent to England to be corrected. I'm going to a school that was set up by Canadian Presbyterian ministers for the sons of East Indian indentured laborers. They weren't made it for people like me, but I ended up there. So when I went to school, I would associate with a group of people. But when I went home to my village, those people were not the same people I associated with. And as a dancer, when I first went to the US, you know, all these places are strange places to me. So it's always up to me, and it's always up to us as nomadic people to find our places in societies that we go to, which we are unfamiliar with, and which very often, most often, we are always looked at as not belonging to. And this existential condition, I think it belongs to so many of us. Once you leave that place where you almost want to call home, you realize not only how complex you are, but how the things that complexity brings. And as Yana says, I read that again. It's an exist. Hold on a second. She actually says it's a benefit, but it's a curse at the same time. And it really depends on how you want to take it, in a sense, to develop that entity you call yourself. And this is where a definition of performance comes in. You know, we are always performing. We are always trying to fit into some frame that somebody makes for us. We are always playing with all these identities we have within us, playing one against the other, playing different things inside us against the other to find out actually who are we. So that final amazing performance is just, who is Yana, who is Henry, who is Daniel, who is Artur? And it's a fascinating exploration. And I think for me, that is the fundamental basis of the knowledge we are seeking, and what I call practices research, artistic research, research creation. This underlies everything we do. It's a search and a research, not just for self, but for all the places that self finds itself in.
So, Henry, I don't know if you want to make any comment on what you
I would love to comment, you know.
Go right ahead.
Very quickly.
For
okay.
closing the meeting, I have one last question, so you can give your last briefing. Because there is this complexity, but now your work is reverberating in Brazil, which is something I think you weren't supposed to. So what do you expect that your work can do here, like with the translation of the language, reaching artists, and now we are connected, more connected. And if you can just say your last words, and I appreciate that. Now at 8 o'clock, in 3 hours, we have another meeting that talks about social transformation and transnational migration. So I give the word for you.
Right. I would like to go back to, you know, to the Nibisa, you know, so to her work, you know, that we started with, you know. So I think the meetings like that are exactly for this reason, you know, so that people, you know, from different places, you know, meet and share, you know, so their experiences, but so their art as well. So I'm particularly grateful, you know, that I had a chance, you know, to see her working, singing and performing for us. And I think that whatever, you know, this interesting and unusual sort of encounter, you know, will you know, develop, you know, the way it will develop, you know, I think that I would love to see more work of the artists, you know, from Brazil, you know, so how they negotiate, you know, the space of, you know, of the host country, you know. So, well, I just very quickly, I wanted to say thank you, Henry, for, you know, quoting and sharing, you know, your agreement with my ideas. You know, it's really touching, and I'm really grateful. Derek Walcott, of course, you know, happened to be a huge inspiration for me, so I hope I did good job, you know, analyzing his work. The thing that the last thought, I think, you know, that I thought, you know, it's important to kind of share, you know, in this space. To me, I find that after all this work, you know, I personally done about exile and cosmopolitanism and movement, I think it is also important to start thinking what nation is about, you know, so, and today's nation specifically. So I feel that people with my experience and with Henry's experience, with people with this experience of global movement, you know, have more insights, you know, so that we should share and should kind of, you know, continue to think about when it comes to the nation, because even like this situation of COVID-19, you know, showed us that the borders exist, right? You know, so and the countries exist and nations exist, and the inequality between those nations and how people globally deal with disasters, you know, so it continues to be there, you know. So I think that it's absolutely, like, I feel it's my responsibility to go to completely different, sort of set of thoughts, set of ideas and sets of terms, and talk about nation, today and what it means. So that would be kind of my last, thought for today's meeting. Yeah. My
last thought is, I was actually supposed to be at the University of Bahia on a fellowship, and then COVID arrived. My host, Professor Ivani Santana, arranged this, and I was looking forward very much to it because I think in Brazil you have probably one of the best set of resources that made that transatlantic journey. So I think you have some of the best memories, resources, cultural artifacts, influences than probably any other country, and especially in that area of Bahia. And I was so looking forward to learning some of that, and then the pandemic came. So I'm looking forward to if it still exists, taking that fellowship up again and really see if I could learn so much more of your country.
Well, Danielle, are we about to finish or something, or
yeah,
or do we have more time? Does it have any question from the YouTube audience that they pose that you consider to be relevant or something?
Yes, I think there was one question talk about the background. There was the same question that Artur did.
Oh, okay.
But there was almost 200 people watching us today.
Wow.
More than 200 people.
Wow.
And it was an amazing meeting. And so we are looking forward to continue this research network and keep on working and reverberating ideas now that the reality changes so fast, because we have so much violence, wars, and struggles and riots. But what I think is good for this meeting, opening the third forum with an art, a way of thinking, it's because when we talk about migration, sometimes we talk about laws and about inequality, violence, racism, and we are talking about creativity, peace, cosmopolitanism, a way to live in this strange world and trying to connect different cultures. So I thank you a lot for that, and I think it's really, really important for us, and we hope to see Henry Daniel in Bahia. I will try to go there too if you come to Brazil, and Yana too. We will try to bring you to Brazil to when the COVID and the pandemic gets better. We hope you will get through it, and that's it.
Thank you once again, for having us, really, having me.
Thank you.
Looking forward. Thank you.
Do we get to see the dance?
Thank you for your participation, for your knowledge.
So I'll finish the broadcast and we can chat a little bit more. So bye-bye for the audience. Thank you very much for being with us. Sorry for technical delays, anything, but nós continuaremos agora às 8 da noite com a segunda mesa, migrações transnacionais e transformações sociais. Até já.
Thank you. Obrigado. Goodbye.
Thank you.
So I think you did it, 2 hours and 8 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, wow, it was 2 hours?
We were good, yeah. So you have another meeting coming up, right? It's like in another section, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It will be with Raul Delgado Wise from Mexico, and a refugee that's in Brazil, but she's from Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. She's in São Paulo. And Karina Quintanilha,